He shielded the alien young with his body. Now the Queen won't free him. HFY Sergeant Ethan Cole had never imagined he'd be fighting a war on a distant planet, especially not one so alien, so brutal. Vethris was unlike anything Earth had ever encountered. Its sky shimmered with strange colors, and the land was jagged, with deep chasms and towering rock formations that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. Ethan and his squad were part of the human forces sent to take control of this hostile world, to help push back against an alien empire that seemed determined to swallow everything in its path. The mission was simple: secure the deep trenches, a series of natural ravines that could be used as hiding spots by the alien forces. Ethan's squad had been dropped in the middle of this hostile terrain, hoping to hold the position until reinforcements arrived. They had been expecting an ambush, but nothing had prepared them for the true horrors they would face. The sound of blaster fire echoed through the ravines as the first wave of alien soldiers charged, their grotesque forms silhouetted against the setting sun. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as his rifle fired again and again, cutting through the enemy lines, but it barely slowed them down. The aliens were fierce, ruthless, and relentless. His squad was outnumbered, and soon they found themselves surrounded. "Hold the line," shouted Sergeant Ethan, his voice barely audible over the roar of battle. But it was clear that they were losing ground. The aliens seemed to move like shadows, swift and terrifying. Ethan could barely keep up, each movement of his squad feeling more like a retreat than an advance. As the fighting continued, something caught Ethan's eye in the distance. A small figure, barely more than a blur, darted across the battlefield. It was an alien, but not one like the others. This creature was different, smaller, more fragile-looking, and it was running for its life, dodging blasts and scrambling to escape. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Without thinking, he turned to his squad. "Cover me," he ordered, rushing forward without waiting for an answer. The others didn't need to ask questions. They could see what he saw, a target too small, too innocent to be caught in the crossfire of war. Ethan pushed forward, his boots kicking up dirt as he ran toward the creature. The alien looked up, its large eyes wide with fear. It didn't understand what was happening, just that it needed to survive. The creature was a youngling, a member of an alien species Ethan had never seen before. Its skin was a shimmering mix of translucent scales, and it had a small, frail body that seemed almost out of place in this savage land. The creature's legs shook with exhaustion, but it kept moving, determined to escape the chaos that surrounded it. Ethan reached the alien just as a blast from an enemy rifle struck nearby, sending a shockwave through the ground. The youngling yelped in pain, stumbling, but Ethan caught it in his arms, shielding it from further attack. His chest burned with the effort, and he could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. There was no time to think, just time to act. The youngling was light, almost weightless in his arms, but fragile. The sounds of battle raged on around them. Ethan could hear the screams of his squadmates, the thunderous crashes of weapons firing, but his focus was entirely on the creature in his arms. It needed protection. It needed him. "Hang on," he muttered, his voice barely audible. The alien made a soft noise in response, but it didn't fight. Instead, it curled closer to him, instinctively trusting the human who had chosen to shield it with his life. Ethan sprinted toward the nearest shelter, an outcropping of rock that offered some cover from the fighting. The ground shook beneath him, and he stumbled, nearly losing his balance. The youngling whimpered, clinging to his jacket with trembling hands. Ethan could feel the creature's small body shuddering, whether from fear or cold he couldn't tell. All he knew was that it was his responsibility now. He had to keep it safe. He reached the rock formation and ducked behind it, pressing himself against the stone. His heart pounded in his ears, and his breathing was ragged, but he couldn't afford to rest. The aliens were closing in, and he knew they wouldn't stop until they had finished what they started. But just as he was about to move again, a sharp sound pierced the air. Ethan froze, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. His eyes scanned the battlefield, trying to make sense of the noise. It wasn't another gunshot, but something else entirely. A voice, alien and chilling, booming across the war zone. "Human," the voice called. "Release the creature." Ethan's eyes widened. The voice wasn't just any alien. It was the Queen, the supreme leader of the alien forces on Vethris. He had heard whispers of her power, her ruthless tactics, and her unyielding desire to control the planet. Now it seemed she was speaking directly to him, but Ethan didn't flinch. He held the youngling tighter, its body pressing into his chest, as though it could feel the weight of the moment too. The Queen's forces were everywhere, and she wasn't just threatening him, she was offering him an ultimatum. "Release it," the Queen's voice came again, this time more forceful, more dangerous. "You cannot protect what you do not understand." Ethan didn't reply. Instead, he turned his back on the battlefield, lifting the youngling in his arms and moving deeper into the shelter. The rocks closed around them like a protective wall, but Ethan knew it wouldn't hold for long. The Queen was relentless, and her forces were closing in on his position. The youngling whimpered again, its fear palpable in the air. Ethan's heart twisted. He knew he couldn't just leave it to die. No matter the cost, he would protect it. He would die before he let the Queen's forces take this innocent life. Then, without warning, the ground shook again, this time more violently. The rocks around them trembled, and Ethan stumbled, nearly losing his footing. He glanced around, and his heart skipped a beat. A massive alien warship hovered overhead, its dark silhouette blocking out the sun. The Queen's ship. A hatch opened on the ship's side, and a series of figures emerged, alien soldiers armed with energy weapons, their eyes glowing with menace. They were coming for him. He didn't have much time. Ethan's pulse raced as he pressed the youngling closer to his chest, feeling the weight of responsibility settle over him like a crushing burden. The Queen's forces were closing in, and the youngling's life hung in the balance. Ethan would not fail it. "Not today," a soft voice echoed in his mind, clear and unrelenting. "Protect it, human. You are its last hope." The words came from deep within him, but they felt like a command. The youngling's trembling stopped, and for a moment Ethan thought it had understood something that he had not. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew one thing: he could not let go. Not now, not ever. As the alien soldiers drew nearer, their weapons raised, Ethan prepared himself for what was to come. He would fight, and he would die if necessary. The Queen's wrath was inevitable, but so was his resolve. With a deep breath, he stepped out from behind the rock and into the open, the youngling still cradled in his arms. Ethan stood, his body tense, every nerve alive with the weight of the moment. He could feel the youngling's tiny body pressed against his chest, its rapid heartbeat syncing with his own. There was no time for fear. He had to think, and he had to think fast. The alien soldiers were getting closer, their footsteps echoing in the rocky canyon. He could see their silhouettes, massive and menacing in the dim light, the glint of weapons sharp and unforgiving. The Queen's ship loomed overhead, and Ethan knew that she was watching him, that her judgment would fall on him like an executioner's axe. The Queen's voice, cold and commanding, reverberated through the air once more, louder now, as if she were standing right beside him. "You will release the creature, human. It does not belong to you." Ethan's heart beat faster, not from fear, but from a deep, unrelenting sense of responsibility. He had no idea what the alien youngling was, or why the Queen wanted it so badly, but he knew one thing: he could not let it go. Not now, not ever. He shifted his weight, gripping the youngling more tightly as he prepared to move. There was no escaping. The alien forces were closing in from every direction. The rocks behind him offered little shelter, and the sound of alien soldiers marching closer made it clear that he had no choice but to face them. His thoughts raced as he glanced up at the massive warship hovering above. There was no turning back. His squad, his friends, were already lost, and the fate of this creature now rested in his hands. The youngling squirmed slightly in his arms, its small body trembling with fear. Ethan could feel its delicate form shuddering against him. He wasn't sure if it understood the gravity of the situation, but it knew one thing: it was afraid. Afraid of the soldiers, afraid of the warship, afraid of the Queen. And in that moment, it was more than just an alien creature to him. It was something precious, something worth protecting at all costs. Ethan's mind snapped back to the present. He had no time to dwell on what might happen. He had to act. He took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders, ready to face whatever came next. He stepped out from behind the rock formation, standing tall despite the odds. He wasn't a soldier anymore, not really, not in this moment. He was a protector, and that was all that mattered. The alien soldiers stopped in their tracks as they saw him emerge. There were 5 of them, their bodies covered in dark, armored exoskeletons that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. Their eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the greenish light of the warship above. They raised their weapons in unison, their energy rifles aimed directly at him. Ethan's hand instinctively reached for his sidearm, but he knew it wouldn't be enough. These soldiers were far beyond anything he could fight with a simple gun. He had no backup, no reinforcements. It was just him and the youngling against an entire alien army. A voice echoed from the ship, the Queen's voice, more powerful now than ever. "You dare to defy me? Do you think you can protect it? You are nothing but a human, a weak, fragile creature." Ethan clenched his jaw. The words stung, but they only made his resolve stronger. He wasn't just fighting for survival now. He was fighting for something far bigger than himself. "Leave it alone," he said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "I won't give it to you." The alien soldiers didn't speak. They didn't need to. They were trained to act, not to talk. They stepped forward, raising their rifles, and Ethan's heart raced. The youngling in his arms whimpered again, its small hands clutching at his uniform. He could feel its fear like a weight pressing down on him, but he wouldn't let it go. He couldn't, not after everything that had happened. Without warning, the soldiers fired. Ethan barely had time to react as the blasts of energy shot through the air toward him. His instincts kicked in, and he dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the deadly beams. He hit the ground hard, but the youngling remained safe in his arms, protected from the blast by his body. He scrambled to his feet, his breathing ragged, but the soldiers were already closing in. They moved like predators, fluid and fast, their weapons raised. Ethan's eyes darted around, looking for a way out, but the canyon was a dead end. There was no escape. The only way forward was through the soldiers. Then from above, a new voice cut through the tension. It was the Queen, her tone full of authority and cold amusement. "Enough!" The soldiers stopped in their tracks, lowering their rifles. The air grew still, and for a brief moment the world seemed to hold its breath. Ethan didn't dare move. He could feel the weight of the Queen's gaze upon him, even though she wasn't there. It was as if she could see straight into his soul, judging him. "I have watched you, human," she said, her voice calm but filled with an icy power. "You are brave, I'll give you that, but your actions are foolish. You cannot win, you cannot escape." Ethan clenched his fists, his anger rising. He wasn't a hero, wasn't some champion. He was just a soldier doing what he had to do, but the Queen didn't know that. She saw him as nothing more than a pawn, a small, insignificant human trying to defy her. "I will not release it," Ethan said again, his voice unwavering. "Not to you, not to anyone." The Queen's laughter echoed in the air, cold and harsh. "You misunderstand, human. You do not have a choice. I will not kill you. Not yet, but you will be my prisoner, and this creature will be mine." The alien soldiers stepped forward again, their hands reaching for Ethan, but the Queen's voice stopped them. "Leave him." Ethan felt the shift in the air, the sudden pressure of the Queen's will. It was as if she had cast a spell over him, controlling the very fabric of the situation. He stood still, his heart pounding, trying to ignore the rising panic inside. He was at her mercy now. There was no running, no fighting. He had lost. "I will make you a deal, human," the Queen continued. "If you surrender the creature to me, I will spare your life. You will be free to leave Vethris, to return to your home. But if you continue this foolish resistance, you will die here and the creature will die with you." Ethan's mind raced. The Queen had a point. If he gave her what she wanted, he could walk away with his life. But he wasn't sure he could live with that choice. The youngling in his arms had already been through so much, and if he gave it to her, what would happen to it? What would the Queen do to it? His eyes locked onto the youngling's terrified gaze. It was looking up at him, its tiny face filled with a mixture of fear and trust. It had no idea what was happening, but it knew one thing: it needed him, and Ethan couldn't abandon it now. Not after everything that had happened, not after everything they had been through together. "No," Ethan said, his voice firm and unyielding. "I won't give it to you, I'll die first." The Queen's silence was deafening. For a long moment there was no sound except the wind whistling through the canyon. Then finally she spoke, her voice laced with cold fury. "Very well, human, you have made your choice, and now you will face the consequences." Ethan stood tall, clutching the youngling in his arms, ready for whatever the Queen had planned. He had no idea what would happen next, but he knew one thing: he wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. Ethan stood motionless, the youngling still clutched tightly in his arms. He could hear the Queen's soldiers moving closer, their heavy footsteps sending small tremors through the ground. Above, the massive warship hovered like an unblinking eye, its shadow stretching across the landscape. The air felt thick with tension, as though the world itself was waiting for something to happen. Ethan's mind raced. The Queen had made her choice clear. If he surrendered, he could go free. but he knew that was never an option. Not now, not after everything. The youngling in his arms looked up at him with wide, innocent eyes, trusting him completely. It was just a creature, a child in the midst of a war it didn't understand, and it needed protection. And that protection, Ethan realized with a shiver, was his responsibility alone. There was no turning back. The Queen's voice broke through his thoughts again, cold and commanding. "You have made your decision, human, but you do not know what you are up against." Ethan didn't respond. His throat was dry, his mouth full of the bitter taste of defiance. He couldn't imagine what the Queen would do next, but he had no intention of making this easy for her. He would fight, and if he had to die here, he would do it on his terms. A group of alien soldiers emerged from the shadows of the canyon, their faces hidden behind dark helmets. Their energy weapons gleamed in the dim light, deadly and efficient. One stepped forward, his voice harsh and guttural. "The Queen will not tolerate your rebellion. Surrender now, and you may yet save yourself." Ethan shook his head, his jaw clenched. Not a chance. Without a word, the soldiers raised their weapons. The air hummed with the sound of energy building up in their rifles. Ethan instinctively crouched down, his body coiling with tension as he prepared to move. But before he could react, a blinding flash of light erupted from above. The Queen's ship released a salvo of energy blasts that tore through the sky, striking the ground near the soldiers. The blasts were powerful enough to make the earth tremble beneath his feet, and the soldiers were instantly thrown back, their bodies crumpling to the ground. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he looked up, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The Queen's ship was hovering even lower now, and the voice of the Queen echoed through the air once more, her tone filled with a mix of annoyance and cold amusement. "You think you can defy me, human? You are nothing, a mere speck in the grand scheme of things." For the first time, Ethan felt the weight of her words. He wasn't just up against a powerful alien force. He was up against a queen, someone who had the power to reshape the fate of entire species. And yet in that moment, as he stood facing her wrath, something inside him clicked. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't intimidated. He wasn't just a soldier trying to survive anymore. He was a protector, and no matter what happened next, he would stand his ground. The youngling squirmed in his arms, its eyes wide with fear. Ethan could feel its tiny body trembling against him, but it trusted him, and that gave him strength. The Queen could do whatever she wanted to him, but she wouldn't get the youngling. Not while he still had breath in his body. The alien soldiers that had been knocked down were slowly getting back on their feet, clearly stunned by the force of the Queen's attack. One of them, a tall figure with sharp features, was the first to speak. "You will regret this, human. The Queen's wrath is not something to take lightly." Ethan's voice was steady, but it carried the weight of someone who had already made peace with their fate. "I've had worse." The tall soldier snarled, but before he could issue another command, the Queen's voice rang out, silencing him. "Enough! You will leave him." The soldiers hesitated, looking to the Queen's ship for guidance. Ethan could see the fear in their eyes. They were strong, powerful, but even they were intimidated by the Queen. It was then that he realized just how far he had come, just how much he had changed in such a short time. He wasn't the same human soldier who had first landed on Vethris, ready to fight for survival. He had become something more. He had become a symbol that could not be broken. The Queen's voice softened, but it was no less threatening. "You think your courage will save you? It will not. You will die here, alone and forgotten, and the creature will die with you. But I offer you a chance. If you release it, I will spare your life." Ethan's grip on the youngling tightened. He could feel its small body shaking against him, but there was no way he was letting go. Not now, not ever. "I won't give it to you," he said, his voice firm. "I won't give up on it. You want it so badly, you'll have to take it from me." There was silence for a long moment, the only sound the wind rustling through the canyon. Then the Queen spoke again, her voice tinged with something different this time. Something almost thoughtful. "You are a stubborn one, human, but I respect that. You remind me of someone I once knew, someone who refused to bend no matter the cost." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The Queen was talking about someone else, someone from her past. But who? And why did it matter now? Before he could ask, the Queen continued, her voice colder than before. "But I will not let this foolishness go on forever. You will release it or you will face the consequences." Ethan shook his head. "I won't. You can kill me. You can take me prisoner, but you won't get this creature, not while I'm still breathing." The Queen's ship loomed overhead, its massive shadow blocking out the light of the sun. Ethan could feel the weight of her presence, the oppressive power she wielded. But as he stood there, his mind sharp and his resolve unyielding, he knew that this wasn't just about him anymore. This was about the future of this alien species, this youngling, and the possibility of peace. He wasn't just fighting for his own survival. He was fighting for something much bigger. The Queen's voice echoed one final time, low and dangerous. "Very well, human, you have made your choice, but know this, I will not forget this." Ethan didn't respond. He didn't need to. He had made his decision, and he was ready to face whatever came next. If it meant his death, so be it. He would die on his terms, protecting the innocent. That was all that mattered. The youngling in his arms had fallen silent, its tiny body pressed against his chest. It was no longer trembling, but Ethan could feel the weight of its trust. It had chosen him, and he would never let it down. The alien soldiers stood still, waiting for the Queen's next command. Ethan's breath was slow and steady, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't backing down. Then, without warning, a new sound cut through the silence, the roar of a ship's engines, growing louder by the second. Ethan turned to see a new vessel coming into view, faster than anything he had seen before. It was sleek, silver, and seemed almost alive, its surface shifting and rippling as it cut through the sky. Ethan didn't know where it had come from, but it was a welcome sight. The ship descended rapidly, landing nearby with a soft thud. The hatch opened and out stepped a figure, a human wearing the uniform of the Resistance. Ethan's eyes widened. Reinforcements. The battle wasn't over yet. The human ship descended from the sky with the grace of a bird in flight, its silver surface gleaming like liquid metal under the fading light of Vethris. Ethan's heart raced as the ship landed smoothly, the sound of its engines cutting off as the craft came to a halt. His eyes remained locked on the vessel, filled with a mixture of relief and disbelief. Reinforcements had arrived, but who had sent them? How had they gotten here so quickly? Ethan barely had time to process the arrival before the hatch on the ship opened, and a figure emerged, moving swiftly across the rocky ground toward him. The new arrival was human, a tall figure dressed in the dark, sleek armor of the Vethris Resistance. The uniform was unfamiliar, but the face behind the helmet was unmistakable. It was Commander Lyle Hansen, a leader among the human forces who had been rumored to be on the planet but had been missing in action for weeks. "Cole," Commander Hansen's voice rang out, his tone sharp and commanding. "Move, now!" Ethan didn't need any further prompting. The sheer urgency in Hansen's voice broke through his fog of confusion. He immediately shifted, holding the youngling tighter as he darted toward the new ship. But before he could move more than a few paces, the alien soldiers stepped forward, their weapons raised once again. The Queen's forces were not going to let him go that easily. One of the soldiers, the tall one from earlier, spoke through a comm link, his voice cold and threatening. "You will not escape, human. You will return with us. You will pay for your insolence." Ethan's eyes narrowed. They thought they could intimidate him. They thought he would give in. But he had made his decision. He wasn't backing down. Before the soldiers could take another step, Commander Hansen's voice cut through the air, commanding and strong. "Fire!" A barrage of blaster fire erupted from the Resistance ship, streaking through the air like streaks of lightning. The shots landed with pinpoint precision, sending the alien soldiers scrambling for cover. The Queen's forces were strong, but they were not prepared for this kind of firepower. In mere moments, the ground was littered with fallen soldiers, their bodies twisting in the dirt. Ethan moved quickly, not wanting to waste a second. The youngling in his arms was trembling again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was something else. It was a strange sort of awareness. It felt as though the creature knew that help had arrived, that it was finally safe. Ethan's heart swelled with hope, but he couldn't let himself feel relief just yet. There was still the Queen to contend with. As the alien soldiers regrouped, Ethan and Hansen reached the Resistance ship. The hatch was already open, and a few soldiers inside motioned for them to hurry. Ethan's legs felt like they were made of lead as he climbed aboard, his breath coming in sharp gasps. The youngling clung to him, its small hands clutching at his uniform. It was still scared, but the worst was over. For now. The hatch closed behind them, sealing them in. Hansen quickly moved to the cockpit, his eyes scanning the console. The sound of weapons fire from outside reverberated in the walls of the ship, but inside there was a tense quiet as the crew prepared for takeoff. "Status report," Hansen barked, his voice steady despite the chaos outside. "Engines are hot, Commander," one of the soldiers said, her fingers flying over the console. "We're ready to go." Hansen nodded, his jaw set in determination. "Then let's get out of here." The ship's engines roared to life, shaking the entire vessel as it lifted off the ground. The ship shot into the air, rising above the rocky terrain and breaking through the atmosphere. Ethan looked out the viewport, his heart heavy as he watched the planet below shrink into the distance. The battle was still raging on Vethris, but for now they had won a small victory. As the ship sped toward orbit, the tension in Ethan's body slowly began to ease. He looked down at the youngling, which had settled quietly in his arms, its eyes wide and uncertain. It had no understanding of what had just happened, only that it was no longer in immediate danger. Ethan could still hear the voice of the Queen in his mind, cold and threatening, telling him that she would not forget his defiance. The Queen had promised consequences, but what did that mean? Was this victory just temporary, or had they truly escaped her wrath? Commander Hansen's voice broke through his thoughts. "You okay, Cole?" Ethan glanced up at the commander, still holding the youngling. He nodded, his throat tight. "I'm fine, but what about the others? Are there more people out there?" Hansen's expression darkened as he stepped away from the cockpit, walking toward him. "You're not the only one who's been fighting this war, Cole. We've had resistance cells working across Vethris trying to slow the Queen down, but it's a long fight. We've lost more than we've gained." Ethan clenched his fists, anger bubbling up inside him. The Queen had been ruthless. She had sent waves of soldiers to wipe out anyone who opposed her. Ethan had seen it firsthand, but despite everything, he refused to give in. They had come this far, he wouldn't stop now. "Where are we going?" Ethan asked, his voice low. "To the flagship," Hansen replied. "We've got a plan. The Queen's forces are strong, but they're not invincible. We've got one shot to end this, Cole, but it's going to take everything we've got." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Ethan didn't need to ask what they had to do. He knew. This wasn't just about saving the youngling anymore. It was about saving everyone. As the ship moved further from the planet, the stars ahead stretched out into the black void of space. They had made it off Vethris, but they weren't safe yet. The Queen would come for them. She would not rest until she had taken back what she saw as hers. "We'll need a crew," Hansen continued, his voice steady, "and we'll need help, but we can't do this alone." Ethan nodded, his eyes hardening with resolve. "Then let's get the help we need." The youngling in his arms stirred, its small body shifting as it looked up at him with those wide, innocent eyes. Ethan met its gaze, feeling a weight of responsibility that went beyond anything he had ever felt before. This wasn't just a creature he was protecting. It was a symbol, a key to the future of this war, and if the Queen wanted it, then he would make sure she didn't get it, not without a fight. "We'll fight," Ethan whispered to the youngling, his voice firm with determination. "We'll fight until the end." The ship continued its journey through the stars, leaving Vethris behind. But as they moved further away from the planet, the reality of the battle ahead sank in. They had escaped for now, but they weren't done. They couldn't be. The Queen would come for them. She would bring her full force to bear, but Ethan was ready. He wasn't the same man who had stepped onto that battlefield, terrified and uncertain. He had learned to fight. He had learned to protect, and if the Queen thought she could break him, she was wrong. The fight for Vethris was far from over. It had only just begun. The stars stretched out in front of them as the ship sped through the vastness of space, leaving the broken planet of Vethris behind. Ethan couldn't stop looking out the viewport, his mind racing. He had come so far, farther than he had ever thought possible. A human soldier, caught in the middle of an alien war, and now, with the youngling still safely in his arms, he was headed toward the Queen's own flagship. The Queen. The name sent a shiver down his spine. She had promised consequences. Ethan wasn't sure what she would do, but he knew one thing for certain: he couldn't back down. Not now, not ever. The commander, Hansen, was at the helm, his focus unwavering as the ship cut through the blackness of space. Around them, the Resistance crew worked quickly to prepare for the next phase of the mission. Ethan could hear the quiet hum of the ship's systems as they moved closer to their destination. They were heading toward the heart of the enemy's empire, and if they didn't succeed, they might not make it out alive. "Ethan," Hansen said, breaking his thoughts, "we're getting close. We've got about an hour before we reach the Queen's flagship. Are you ready?" Ethan's jaw tightened. Ready? Could anyone be ready for what lay ahead? The Queen's ship was a fortress in space, a heavily armed battle cruiser that dwarfed anything the human forces could field. It had been the center of her power for years, and now they were about to infiltrate it. A direct assault was suicide, but this was their only option. "Ready as I'll ever be," Ethan said, his voice low but steady. Hansen nodded, his eyes scanning the crew as they prepped the ship for the final phase of their plan. He didn't say anything more, but his face was hard, his mind clearly set on the mission. Ethan respected the man for that. Hansen wasn't just a commander, he was a leader. And he was leading them straight into the heart of the enemy's domain. Ethan turned his attention back to the youngling in his arms. It was still as fragile as it had been when he first picked it up in the trenches, but something had changed. It no longer seemed completely helpless. There was an air of awareness in its large, dark eyes, a quiet intelligence that Ethan hadn't noticed before. The youngling, though small and delicate, had survived more than any child should have to. It had seen things no one its age should ever witness, and yet it had held onto life with everything it had. Ethan couldn't help but wonder what it meant. Why was it so important to the Queen? What power did it hold? He wasn't sure, but he intended to find out. If it was the key to ending this war, then he would protect it with everything he had. No one would take it from him. Not the Queen, not anyone. As they neared the flagship, the tension on the ship grew palpable. The Resistance crew worked with precision, securing the ship systems and preparing to make their move. Ethan remained still, clutching the youngling close, his mind racing with questions he couldn't answer. How would they get inside? What was the plan once they did? And most importantly, how would they survive? A soft ping echoed from the ship's control panel, and Hansen's eyes flicked toward it. "Approaching the flagship's perimeter," he said, his voice calm but sharp. "We've got about 5 minutes before we're inside." Ethan's pulse quickened. He could already feel the weight of the moment bearing down on him. This was it. There would be no turning back now. They had to do this, or all would be lost. The Queen had to be stopped, and if the youngling was the key, then they had to get it to safety. The ship shook suddenly, a low, rumbling vibration that rippled through the hull. Ethan could hear the sound of energy shields being activated, the ship bracing itself for whatever was coming next. "They know we're here," Hansen muttered, a slight edge of tension in his voice. "Brace yourselves." As the ship drew closer to the flagship, Ethan's thoughts flashed back to the day he had first landed on Vethris. He had been a soldier, part of a small force tasked with holding a position. He had never imagined that he'd be standing here now, about to infiltrate the enemy's stronghold, protecting a creature that the enemy's Queen valued more than anything else. The ship lurched again, and Ethan felt his body tense as the Resistance ship was caught in the gravitational pull of the flagship. The sensors began to beep rapidly, warning them of the increasing proximity to the enemy ship. The crew members exchanged brief looks, preparing for the inevitable fight that would follow. "We've got one shot at this," Hansen said, his voice steady despite the mounting pressure. "We get in, we get the youngling to safety, and we disable their weapon systems. If we don't, we're done for." Ethan nodded. The plan sounded simple, but he knew it wouldn't be easy. The Queen's forces would be ready for them. They had to move quickly, decisively. No mistakes. As the ship drew closer, the view ahead began to reveal the full scale of the flagship. It was a massive vessel, its dark hull lined with glowing lights and turrets, a deadly machine of war. The flagship seemed to loom over them, a monstrous shadow against the backdrop of space. But despite its size, the Resistance ship was sleek and nimble, cutting through the air like a knife. They had the element of surprise, and they needed to use it to their advantage. Then, as if on cue, the Resistance ship's engines roared to life, surging forward as they broke through the outer defenses of the flagship. The ship shook as they passed through the initial layers of security, a barrage of energy blasts sizzling past them as they narrowly avoided direct hits. The enemy was firing back, but they were too fast. "Almost there," Hansen called, his voice strained with concentration. "We're in their hangar bay. Get ready." The ship's landing gear deployed with a soft hiss as they touched down inside the flagship's hangar. The door opened, and the crew moved with urgency, rushing toward the exit. Ethan followed close behind, the youngling still in his arms, its wide eyes scanning the surroundings. They were inside, but they weren't alone. As soon as the hatch opened, they were met with a wall of soldiers. Alien warriors, heavily armed, stood ready to engage. Their eyes glowed with a fierce, cold light as they raised their weapons, preparing for battle. But they weren't expecting the Resistance's firepower. The soldiers barely had time to react as the resistance crew opened fire, blasting their way through the hangar. Ethan didn't hesitate. He charged forward, using the chaos around him as cover. He had one goal: get the youngling to safety. It didn't matter how many aliens stood in his way. He wasn't stopping. The sounds of weapons fire filled the air, the hiss of energy blasts colliding with armor, the shouts of soldiers as they were struck down. But Ethan focused only on the creature in his arms. It was safe for now. That was all that mattered. They pushed forward deeper into the heart of the flagship, the resistance soldiers clearing the way. The corridors were narrow, the walls dark and imposing. The air was thick with the scent of metal and ozone. Every step felt like it could be their last, but Ethan refused to let fear take over. Not while the youngling was depending on him. And then, at last, they reached the heart of the flagship, the throne room. The doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the Queen seated on a massive throne at the far end of the room. Her eyes locked onto Ethan, her cold gaze filled with fury. She had known they were coming, and now they were here. "You dare to defy me?" Her voice was low, full of venom. "You think you can escape the consequences of your actions?" Ethan stepped forward, the youngling still held close. "I'm not here to escape anything," he said, his voice steady. "I'm here to end this, to stop you." The Queen rose from her throne, her towering figure casting a shadow over them. Her eyes flicked to the youngling in Ethan's arms, and for the briefest moment there was a flicker of something, surprise perhaps, or something darker. But it was gone before Ethan could fully read it. "You think this creature is the key to stopping me?" she sneered. "You're a fool." Ethan met her gaze, his eyes unflinching. "No, I think you're the one who's been blinded by your own power. This isn't just about this creature. It's about the future, it's about peace." The Queen's expression darkened, and she stepped forward, her soldiers moving to surround them. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Ethan felt the weight of her words, but he didn't flinch. He was ready. He had come this far, and he wasn't backing down. He wasn't alone anymore.